Hey, what's up, guys? Little man with a big opinion here. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about winter preparations because we are about 2.5 weeks out from fall. And I'm fairly happy with that because, we're on September 2nd right now, and our median average for the highs in the high to mid 90s with a low in the 70s. And by the end of the month, we have a high in the mid 80s and the lows in the mid to low 60s, which, and then the occasional, dropping into the high 50s. Um, Moving on from there, October beginning, it's 80 and 60, and by the end of it, it's mid 70s and 50s. And basically keeps on that trend. By the time you hit December, our highs are in the 50s and lows in the 30s and 20s. So, as a prepper, what are some of the things that you should be thinking about for, getting this track out for the next several months ahead? I do live in Texas. I recently moved. I didn't bring any of the leftover wood that I had from last winter. Uh, we moved in June, so I haven't gotten any wood for this coming fall/winter. But if you live somewhere where you have the ability, you have a fireplace, a wood burning stove, uh, then now is that time where it's easier for you to, you know, start gathering the wood now. If you want it to dry out, then you need to start splitting it now. Um, there are a few people that have started advertising cords of wood for sale, and but I'm probably going to go out to our family farm and cut the wood myself. But that's something that you kind of need to start thinking about. Um, Obviously, most people have, heaters with their central air and heating, but the fire in a fireplace or wood burning stove is just a added comfort. Most people, when it gets cold out, they tend to come inside, and if you have a room that can create that extra heat source, then you can congregate there. Maybe, lower the thermostat, save yourself some funds on your electric bill, or, in that situation where a tree falls on a power line, you're out of power for, you know, one night. Um, Something happens at Trent, uh, the power station. They're running tests. There's rolling blackouts because you live in California and they're trying to, save power. Whatever the reason is, if you lost power and you had a fireplace or wood burning stove and you didn't have the wood in place to get something going, then that's on you. On top of having wood storage, you should also make sure you have the appropriate amount of kindling, some sort of fuel, and a ignition source. When we had that big freeze in Texas last year, I had a ton of really nice, thick wood, between, you know, 2 inches and, let's say, 6 inches. And I actually ran out of, my small little sticks to get the fire going. Ended up having to tear up some of the moving boxes to create that smaller um, fuel source to get the bigger stuff going. So, something I don't want to happen again this year, and I'm planning to have a lot more 1 inch to, finger width or pencil. I'm gonna go figure out what my cats are knocking down, and we'll be back. Down to picture frame, but we got it back up. Anyway, so If you lived in Texas and you went through this last winter, then you know what you need to, fix for this winter in case something bad like that happened again. Um, from what I read on it, they say it's a once in a lifetime freeze, all the way down to a once in a decade freeze, depending on what research you go off of. But I tend to err on the side of caution. Plus, I like to have a fire. So, storing firewood, it's a fairly important thing if you have the ability to have a fire where you live. If you don't, then the other things I'm going to talk about, this is when you should start taking notes. And if you have a fireplace and you've stored up firewood, then everything else I'm going to talk about is just added, protection, added prepping. If you don't have a sleeping bag that is rated for, I would say, 10 degrees colder than your coldest night where you live, then you should probably purchase one of those. Where we live, we have a minute possibility of snow each year. So we can have days in the high teens, we can have days in the mid 20s. Most of it is going to be in the 30s. But I got a sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees, and I believe that will be sufficient. If you can't afford a sleeping bag or it's not that big on your prepping list, then making sure you have extra blankets, because being able to layer in a situation where the power went out, the more blankets you can have, you can basically create a sleeping bag. Next, making sure you have some sort of light sources, because you don't want to be doing any of this stuff in the dark if the power went out and it being cold. The preferred option is some sort of headlamp. That way you're not using your hands when it's cold outside. After that, having alternative heating sources like storing hot hands. Zippo makes like a little, fuel container that it's just like a metal thing that goes inside basically a little piece of cloth. Those things are pretty great. Having gloves, jackets, snow pants if that applies to you, thermal layering, just typical winter weather clothing. But for these, I would keep them stored inside of some container. And if it's just you, you could dedicate a drawer to it. If it's the whole family, make sure you got enough for the whole family. That way, if something were to happen, your 5-year-old isn't searching around for a jacket, your 80-year-old grandma isn't searching around for a jacket. It's in this tote, it's color coded or labeled, and you've got the supplies in there. If it's a big enough tote and you don't have that many people, that's where you can also store your sleeping bags and blankets for the situation. One of the things I forgot to mention with the blankets that we did during the winter storm is we didn't want our fireplace trying to heat up our entire 1,200 square foot townhome, and so we hung blankets up, blocking off the stairs and the upstairs area, and it essentially made it to where the fireplace only had to focus on the roughly 580 square foot, 600 square foot area that was downstairs, and blocking that off just helped trap the hot air where we were. And, we weren't trying to heat up an area that we weren't going to be in. So having the extra blankets can also benefit you if you don't have doors in between hallways, or, maybe you just have an archway between the kitchen and the dining room. Just extra blankets will allow you to section off the area that you're trying to heat. Maybe you do have a generator. That's the next thing I was going to say, is you can leave the generator, running in a bedroom that you've got a window open, you're getting your ventilation or whatever, and you run the power cords into where you're at. I've also seen a couple people do it that way. I had a friend of mine that their generator got stolen because they put it outside, and mentioned to them that, in that sort of situation, you get your ventilation by storing it in a bedroom. And the next time they had a power outage, they did it that way. If you are going to run the generator inside like that, just make sure you got a carbon monoxide detector and you'll be good to go. Outside of that, just general prepping items. When it's colder outside, I would say the environment is harsher than if it was hotter outside. If it's hotter, you are dealing with mostly, dehydration and, heat related injuries, but those can be mitigated by being inside, getting under cover. When it's cold outside, the cover does help, but I would say, excuse me, I thought I heard someone calling me, but I would say that hypothermia is a lot more difficult to deal with if you aren't prepared than hyperthermia. So, having an emergency blanket, a first aid kit, you got food stored up in case you had to shelter in place, because that's another thing with the dropping temperatures as we move into fall and winter, is road closures, snowstorms, that kind of thing. Being trapped in your home is most likely better than being trapped outside. But if you don't have these supplies within your home to, feed and water and take care of your family, then, the only benefit of being inside your home is shelter. So, the typical 3 days worth of food and water per person, that's what FEMA recommends. If you're just getting started into prepping, I would recommend you start with a week, but whatever your budget is, however you're planning this out. If you're doing a day at a time, great. If you're doing a week at a time, a month at a time, you're only putting in X dollars and you think other things are of a higher priority, then go for that. But moving into the winter months, this is my thought process, my plan. Outside of the home, so I'm working on my rain catchment system. I don't have the space to store the water inside, so I need to keep in mind that I either need to insulate the buckets to keep the water from freezing, or I need to make sure that they're not completely topped off, so when they do freeze, they don't expand and bust the 55-gallon drums. If you store any of your prepping food outside, if it's not a climate controlled area, then you just need to take stock, having your food go below freezing at night and then back above it during the day, and just back and forth. Temperature changes are not recommended for that kind of thing. And if your food is freezing outside and there's any type of liquid within the can or bag or whatever, then it will most likely expand and could compromise the containers in, therefore making the food go bad. So just have some sort of plan system in place. If your food is underneath the ground, then the temperature should stay fairly similar. If it's inside of some shed that's got a heater and an AC, then it's just like storing it in your house. And that's all I got for you. If you have anything else you would add to my fall prep list leading into the winter months, then feel free to add it in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed the video, you learned something, were motivated, then subscribe and like the video. And lastly, if you have a friend or family member that benefit from our little discussion in this video, then share the video with them, and catch you in the next one.